some folks say all truth is relative. It just depends on what you believe. You know, hey man, ain't no way to know for sure who God is or what's really true. But that means you believe your own statement, that there's no way to know what's really true. You saying that that statement is true. You're killing yourself. If what's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me, what if my truth says yours is a lie? Is it still true? Come on, man.
Alright, so do you think it's relative or absolute? Like, do you think it's based on our own perception, or do you think it's like a universal absolute truth out there somewhere?
I hope there's an absolute truth out there. I mean, I hope you really can't answer that like that. I mean, I don't know. I would hope so.
Truth is what gets us up in the morning to figure out how we're going to go and live our lives. Truth must be absolute because it must get us up out of bed in the morning. We have this understanding that we gotta work to make our living, or there's these needs in the world for the people around the world. These things all influence our understanding of truth.
Our universe demands that there's absolute truth. You know, there's no way the laws that we're bound by, universal laws, and you can even go into moral laws, that all this came about by accident, or you know, that it's just relative, determined on your perspective on how you look at it. I mean, gravity is gravity. The laws, again, the distance from the sun, all these things that are constants. You know, the speed of light, that's a constant regardless of what dimension you're in. You know, it's still, you know, 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. And, you know, so these things that are constants are within our universe. So this idea that truth can be relative, it really comes down to a humanistic understanding of what truth really is.
The humanist puts this as the possibility that human beings themselves are the measure of all things. A human being himself can be the measure of morality. Now this is also a very valid point, because it's humans who ask moral questions. They begin to ask, how do I behave rightly? What will be my standard? And therefore we look at the human instinct.
On the theistic view, objective moral values are grounded in God. God's own holy and perfectly good nature supplies the absolute standard against which all actions and decisions are measured. God's moral nature is what Plato called the good. He is the locus and the source of moral value. He is by nature loving, kind, generous, faithful, just, and so forth.
Do you think it's relative or absolute?
Relative.
Begin to ask your question, what happens to the truism when your moral truism differs from someone else's? How do you begin to arbitrate between the two?
If it is relative, then someone can just, you know, make up their own truth and say that it is truth. But, you know, if someone says that it is truth, then they believe that that's an absolute truth, regardless if they say it's true or not, you know? So again, we're playing with words, but it's a deeper meaning, you know, when you think about absolute truth and relative.
If naturalism is true, then objective moral values do not exist.
If you do not have a transcendent frame of reference, then any standard of morality will therefore be subjective only. It is a transcendent personal being, which is my basic thesis, which provides the basis for objective morality, which applies to all of us. So any other standard of morality will of necessity be subjective.
On the naturalistic view, it's hard to see why there would be anything wrong with your raping someone. Such activity goes on all the time in the animal kingdom. Thus, without God, there is no absolute right and wrong, which imposes itself on our conscience.
So do you think there's an absolute truth, or is it absolute truth, like a universal truth that applies to all mankind? Or are things just relative, you know, based on our perception, our culture, whatever? Or do you think like there's an absolute, maybe morality or absolute truth about maybe God or whatever? Like, is there absolute truth, do you believe?
I think there's laws of the universe that are absolute, that no matter what we believe or disbelieve are gonna be. Now, whether some divine being put those in place or not, I'm I am not worthy to speak on, frankly. So yes, I do believe there's some absolute truth. As far as morality goes, I don't know. I don't know about that. I mean, there's stuff that makes society work better, and there's stuff that makes society work not so well. But once again, I don't feel like I'm in a position to say yes, absolutely. I tend to be humble in these things because I don't know. I don't claim to know, and I'm a little skeptical of anybody that says they do know 100%. I think without doubt, you miss things. You miss details that might widen your worldview without some doubt. So that's a good answer.
Okay. To some extent, we are relative. In the sense, I'm relating to you, you are relating to me. You are listening to a total stranger in patience. I mean, that's an amazing aspect of relationship. See, after all, relative comes out of relationships. Secondly, agnosticism, there's a soft agnosticism. I know something of God, I do not know a lot about God. It's a welcome statement. Skepticism, I know certain things, but I'm struggling with some doubts. Surely, that's not a bad thing at all. So, when you take those three aspects, relativism, skepticism, and agnosticism, in their hardest forms, are absolutely implausible.
Okay, so do you believe there's absolute truth, or is it all relative?
I think it's relative.
My second question, do we have the inner resources to live up to the moral standards that we have set for ourselves? If we do not belong to any particular religion, and if you feel that morality is essentially personal and you have said that you shall do these things, you shall not do these things, have we been able to be able to live up to the standards of morality that we have set for ourselves?
The question before us is, if God does not exist, do objective moral values exist?
The second level is the pragmatic, because you can say that morals are relative, but if something wrong which is done to you, which begins to hurt you and affect you personally, you would stand up to fight against that evil. And therefore you find that what you think is relative is really not quite relative. It's only till it begins to impinge on your own life you can absolutely philosophize about ethics.
If God exists, then we have a sound foundation for morality. If God does not exist, then there are no objective moral values, no objective moral duties, and no moral accountability. We are ultimately landed in nihilism. God is therefore vitally necessary to morality.
Truth has to be absolute because absolute is pure, it's concrete, it's unbreakable. Relative is like an imagination, something that's breakable, it's very frail. So when you say there has to be absolute truth, yeah, there has to be absolute truth in this world. And the absolute truth is Jesus Christ, because it's true that he came, died, and rose again.
But I want to say something here from the Christian point of view. God will never give us absolute truth about his existence. Have you ever thought of that? Let's consider ourselves as a bunch of atheists. And suppose God appears here at the podium and waves his hands and says, I'm God. I want to suggest to you that we will have a problem and he will have a problem. What is God's problem? He would have reduced us to the level of robots and compelled us to believe in him. Our problem would be, we will have no choice not to believe in him. Because God, and this is important, because this is closely related to morality, because morality is a function of free choice. I choose to do something. God gives us enough evidence so that belief in him is reasonable, but he leaves enough evidence out so that reason and evidence alone can never convince you of God. You will have to take a step of relational faith in order to experience inner certitude.